Welcome back to Sky News. Thanks for your company. Many GPs are refusing to offer the AstraZeneca vaccine to people under 50, fearing potential lawsuits if patients suffer side effects. The Sydney Morning Herald reports doctors are seeking legal clarification from the federal government, saying they face a dangerous risk of litigation. The Australian Medical Association has advised New South Wales GPs not to administer the AstraZeneca vaccine unless there are exceptional circumstances. While in Victoria, the AMA says doctors should be guided by federal advice. The federal government insists the vaccine is safe.
No doctor need worry. And as the AMA has said to me today, doctors want to take care of their patients. Their focus is not about other elements. And so it's a democracy and everybody is entitled to their views. But the vaccines are safe, they're encouraged, and we want Australians in phase 1B and 1A to bring themselves forward as quickly as they feel comfortable.
Joining me live for more analysis on this is Luke Naina, political advisor from Council House, and Ben Oquist, executive director at the Australia Institute. Gentlemen, appreciate your time this afternoon. Ben, I'll start with you. The government faced a massive roadblock this week in terms of the vaccine rollout and the advice around AstraZeneca, as we just heard. It can't be good for public confidence.
No, it's not. We need the public to be confident in the vaccine, and I think overall there is starting to be a kind of belief that maybe the public is losing confidence in the government's ability to handle the situation. And now that's not just bad for overall health of our society, but it's bad for the economy too if those confidence levels don't resume. And of course, unless the vaccine is rolled out successfully, we won't have that return to the health of the economy. And I think it's a real worry. It's politically a worry for the Prime Minister too. Laura Tingle was making this point in her column on the weekend that Boris Johnson has been kind of saved in the United Kingdom by a successful rollout of the vaccine, where the opposite is potentially happening to the Prime Minister here. And he's invited the Australian public to judge him on the effectiveness of the rollout and the vaccine, and it's not going well so far. We should have the ability to produce vaccines of all types in Australia, and the fact that we don't have that manufacturing capability to produce the Pfizer type of vaccines is potentially really going to hamper us, not just this year, but as Mark Butler was pointing out, in the next year, if we have to put in place booster vaccines to deal with variants. Australia needs a better manufacturing capability overall. I think that's one of the things the pandemic has really shown up. The Centre for Future Work showed that Australia ranks last in the OECD in terms of manufacturing self-sufficiency. And if we could just build that up a bit, you'd see a big increase to GDP and 400,000 jobs. And critically, in this instance, we'd have the ability to produce those mRNA type vaccines, that the Pfizer type, and that would be in a much better position. And yes, that takes a while to build that capability, but this pandemic's been going on a year now, and there's going to be future pandemics. It's a lesson that Australia needs to do better in manufacturing self-sufficiency overall, and in this area in particular.
Well, Luke, the government has said it wants all Australians vaccinated by the end of the year, but it seems that it has been struggling with supply issues. Do you think securing more of the Pfizer vaccine is enough to fix these issues?
The Morrison government has put Australia in a very enviable position. This week, the Prime Minister announced the securement of a further 20 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. And you just need to look abroad as to what is really happening in respect to COVID. In the United States, we saw 4 million people receive their vaccinations yesterday, taking their total to 68 million people. However, they registered a further 80,000 positive cases of COVID-19 yesterday alone, and their death toll stands at over 500,000 people. You compare that to here in Australia, where the government has, from the very offset of the COVID pandemic, followed medical advice, not rushed the vaccine rollout. We have not had to seek emergency approvals to commence our vaccination rollout. We have had only 30,000 cases of positive COVID-19 tests received. Yesterday, 6 all isolated to return travellers and no community transmission. So the public have every reason to be confident in the government's rollout. What undermines public confidence are comments from the Shadow Health Minister that we heard this morning, forecasting issues around booster shots, extra jabs needed towards the end of the year that are not based in science. What we need to look at is what is the current situation. We are very strictly following the health advice. We have enough vaccines to cover the entire Australian population by year's end. Yes, there is a priority to do it as quickly as possible to open up our borders, to get our economic recovery back on track, but we shouldn't be rushing it for the sake of saying we're higher up a ladder in terms of global rankings, when quite frankly, we are the envy of the world in terms of our current COVID position.
Luke, do you think the public confidence has been, I guess, shaken a little bit this week with the mixed messages?
I don't think there has been mixed messages. There's been new information provided, and the Prime Minister holding a 7:15 p.m. news conference to ensure that Australians are kept up to date is in keeping with the approach the government has taken from the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is to be transparent with the advice. It is an advisory. There is a need for people to continue to get vaccinated. Yes, this will delay the rollout slightly. However, people can have confidence in Australia's regulatory systems to ensure that the vaccines are safe. We are taking a precaution here in terms of saying that the AstraZeneca vaccine should be limited to people over the age of 50. But whilst we don't have community transmission, that is not going to cause major implications for the way in which Australians go about life and business. So Australians should continue to feel extremely reassured with the government's approach here. We have the time frame. Minister Tehan was out earlier today saying that the government has revised that back to the end of the year. However, we are really needing Australians to come forward. All Australians in phases 1A and 1B should be coming forward to get their vaccine, so we continue to then shore up and release the rest of the Pfizer vaccine for stages 2A and 2B.
Look, medical experts have been tasked with drawing up plans to reopen the international border. Ben, we're still constantly seeing different states have snap lockdowns and shut borders domestically. How can international borders happen?
Well, they can't until the vaccine is rolled out, and we can't until the vaccine is rolled out effectively, not just in Australia, but globally. As Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, has wanted to say, no one is safe until everyone is safe. And I think this is a big challenge for Australia to do better in our region as well, a particular responsibility in the Pacific. And I'm worried that that's gone off the boil too. We heard of 8,000 vaccines being taken into PNG in a first wave of announcements by the Prime Minister. But where is the big follow-up to ensure that the whole of the Pacific is being vaccinated, and that Australia has that as just as big a responsibility as vaccinating the domestic population here in Australia? How can we be at the forefront, particularly in the PNG, but other Pacific countries in our region? Because we need to play our part globally, not just in Australia. Because yes, Australia's only rolled out 1 million or 1.6 million vaccines when there's been 750 million rolled out globally, and we're going to have to vaccinate the entire population here. But really, it's a global problem needing global solutions, and Australia's got to take a much bigger leadership role in ensuring the Pacific gets vaccinated quickly. Otherwise, all sorts of variants can be exposed. We can be exposed to in the future, and it will be bad not just for our region, but domestically as well. And the borders just won't be able to open up.
Luke, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. The Trans-Tasman travel bubble is expected to open April 19. Do you think the public can have confidence it will go ahead?
Absolutely. And again, I think we need to look at how states have managed the pandemic here. In New South Wales, Premier Gladys Berejiklian has resisted closing state borders. Under most circumstances. The only time was under the second outbreak in Victoria, where we saw the Victorian border closed. Premiers have a lot to answer for here. They have been relying on the Morrison government's JobKeeper package to ensure that they are in a position to close borders. We are talking about a travel bubble now with New Zealand. We're looking to expand travel bubbles by the end of the year to trade partners such as Singapore and Malaysia and other Asian nations. What's critically important, again, to give people the assurance is that the frontline and high-risk category individuals have received their vaccine. And the way in which Australia is rolling out our vaccination program does ensure that those at higher risk of medical complications from contracting COVID-19 receive that vaccination first. So there is a threshold question here. States within Australia have demonstrated that you can take a common sense approach to this. managing the COVID-19 health and economic questions that are put to us at a time like this. And I think, again, the Australian public should have every confidence that international travel will resume with New Zealand on schedule and through other parts of Asia by year's end.
And just finally, Ben, the story dominating world headlines, of course, is the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. What impact will Prince Philip's death have on Australia? There doesn't seem to be a mood to change to a republic just yet.
I'm not sure it'll have a big impact on Australia. There is a long way from this country, and an enormous amount of media coverage, probably a bit out of proportion with his impact on Australians' people's lives. But I think separately from that, I think the Republic is an issue whose time will come, not this month or this year, but in the end, Australia is going to want to stand on its own 2 feet and have its own head of state as somebody from Australia.
Luke, do you think there's a renewed admiration for the royal family after this?
Australia is a great success story, and it's founded in 65,000 years of Indigenous culture and heritage in our European settlement and in our multicultural migration. And all 3 pillars are well respected by Australians across the nation. There is a huge respect for the role of the royal family here in Australia. I do agree with Ben that I think the Republican issue is way down the track. It is certainly not a pressing priority for most Australians as they go about their daily lives. But Prince Philip was someone who held Australia very dear to his heart, visiting here over 20 times. The Duke of Edinburgh Award is something I remember fondly from my school days. And I think people do feel an admiration towards the Queen and towards Prince Philip, and it's something that we will continue to hold dear as it's part of the fabric of this nation.
Unfortunately, gentlemen, we are out of time. Luke Nina and Ben Oquist, I appreciate both your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.